Right, so we've defined our terms, we've talked about what's at stake. Let's start shifting towards your critique a little bit of other forms trying to explain consciousness and your case for the soul. So one question would be, why can't we just reduce mental states to brain states? So Paul Churchland has argued that sound is just a train of compression waves traveling through air. Light is just electromagnetic waves. Warmth is identical with low average molecular kinetic energy. And similarly, things like color can be reduced. Why can't we just reduce these kind of mental events and sensations down to brain states?
Well, let's just begin with color, for example. Color cannot be reduced to, or that just means identified with, a wavelength of light. And the reason is that there are things that are true about colors that aren't true about wavelengths of light, and so they can't be the same thing. This is called the law of identity. If X is identical to Y, so that water is identical to H2O, then whatever's true of water will be true of H2O and vice versa, because they're not two things, they're the same thing. If you can find one thing true of water that's not true of H2O, then they can't be the same thing. So red is darker than yellow, but no wavelength is darker than any other wavelength. One wavelength can be longer than another wavelength, or could vibrate more rapidly than another wavelength, but a wavelength isn't lighter or darker than another wavelength. Wavelengths are rapidly moving and vibrating, but colors are stationary. They're on the surface of an object, and they're not moving, they're just there. So and I could add other things. It's clear that color has features that wavelengths don't, and vice versa. So they can't be the same thing. The only thing science has discovered is that there is a correlation, maybe even a causal relationship between wavelengths and colors. What I mean is that every time a color appears, there might be a wavelength of light that's associated with it. And that wavelength of light, perhaps the apple absorbs a wavelength and reflects another wavelength, and that causes the surface to be colored red. So redness may be caused by wavelengths, but it's not the same thing as a wavelength. Now, the same thing is true of brain states and mental states. Take a pain. If you have a severe pain in your knee, there is a what it is like that is the very essence of that pain. It wouldn't if you experienced the pleasurable taste of strawberry shortcake after you got stuck with a pin in the knee, you would be pretty weirdly wired, but you wouldn't be in pain. You would be experiencing a pleasurable taste of strawberry shortcake. So the very essence of a pain is the what it is like to be in pain. There is no what it is like to be in a certain C fiber firing configuration. Neurons can be described exhaustively using scientific language. If you want to describe, a neuron is a cell in the brain, and if you want to describe it, you can appeal to things like calcium ions and how they flow down the dendrons and the axils of the neuron, and how the movement causes a little spark of electricity in a little gap between one neuron and the other called a synapse. Doesn't matter if you remember the words, but we can describe, Sean, a neuron exhaustively in third-person scientific language. But one thing is left out, and there is no description of what it is like to be in pain. That is described by what we learn from first person awareness of what is going on within us. Whereas the neuron is described by a third person description of an object, the neuron in your brain, using scientific language. And so the two are completely different, but that doesn't show they're not correlated. But that's the reason that you can't reduce pain to a neuron firing, because there are things that are true of pains that aren't true of neurons firing, and vice versa.
That's really helpful. And by the way, you've mentioned strawberry shortcake and cherry. When this is done, I'm going to take you for dessert, just so you know.
I'm ready to go, buddy.
Good.
I'm ready to go.
Now, with high school students, obviously we're colleagues at Baiola, Talbot School of Theology, but I still teach one high school Bible class. And I'll say, if Professor McDowell is Spider-Man, we're going to have all the same properties together. Both 150 pounds, both 5'9". But if I'm from California and Spider-Man's from New York, then I'm not identical to Spider-Man or Peter Parker. So if light just is electromagnetic waves, they will share all the properties in common. But your point is light can be brighter and less bright, but electromagnetic waves aren't going to have the property of brightness. They'll have other kinds of properties. Therefore, light might be correlated always with electromagnetic waves, may be caused by it, but not reducible to and not identical with electromagnetic waves. Now, the same would be with pain. This is really helpful with students. I'll say, okay, describe pain for me in physical terms. And somebody will say a C fiber firing. And then as I push back a little bit, they begin to realize that the essence of pain is a feeling of hurtfulness that could have been experienced in potentially a different physical base if we had silicon bodies.
Yes.
Therefore, pain cannot be reduced just to the physical state. So what we've done so far is we're critiquing some of these naturalistic or physicalist attempts to reduce mental things down to the physical. It doesn't work because they share different properties. Did I sum that up well?
Wonderful. I couldn't have done it better myself. That's exactly right. And it's important for people to remember. When we're asking, can a conscious state be reduced to a brain state? We're asking the question of what a conscious state is. We want to know what one is. Is it identical to a brain state? That's very different than asking the question, what causes the conscious state? Or what has to be working in the brain before you can feel a conscious state? So, I mean, if you give me anesthetize my gums at the dentist chair, I will not feel pain when the dentist drills my teeth. But that doesn't show that pain is identical to those nerves firing in my gums. All that shows is that before a pain can occur within my conscious life, certain things in my body have got to be working.
Gotcha.
But this means that body and soul work together, not that they have the same properties.
That's great. That's very helpful. Now let's shift to another provocative claim in the book where we're going to start moving towards the positive case for substance dualism. You say, quote, here are two widely acknowledged, even by steadfast detractors, two widely acknowledged points. Physicalism seems false to nearly everyone, while substance dualism seems obviously true. Now, how much stock should we put in these seemings that people have that I seem to be body and soul, and it seems that physicalism is false, especially because there's a lot of things that seem like they're common sense, that like a table is physical all the way through, or the sun is rising and the sun is setting. How much stock do we put in the fact that you say is nearly universal, that it seems like physicalism is false, and that dualism seems obviously true?
I think that the word seems just means it appears to be this way to me. That's the way it seems or appears to me to be. Okay. I think that if cross-culturally, so that this just can't be a cultural phenomenon, if human beings around the world and throughout their history, if things seem a certain way to them, and they're almost all in agreement about that, then that doesn't prove they're true, that they're right about it. But what it does is it places a substantial burden of proof on those who are going to disregard the way things seem. Because if an object seems a certain way to me, it usually is that way. My senses can be wrong sometimes, but we generally trust the way things appear to us unless we have good reason to believe the opposite. And so we did find a good reason to believe that the sun doesn't literally rise and set. And so the way things seem to us has a very nice explanation that explains why it seems that way, even though it's not that way. But that's not true when it comes to the fact that I seem to be different from my body, and I seem to be the kind of thing that is capable of surviving in some afterlife when my body is fragmenting in the grave and deteriorating. And so what this does is doesn't prove it, but it does place the burden of proof that physicalists have not yet met. And so this has surfaced what is called the hard meta problem of consciousness. Earlier, we looked at the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there consciousness to begin with? And this is called the hard meta problem of consciousness. And here's what the problem is. If physicalism is true, why does everybody in the world, from Neanderthals to the present, believe that they're souls that could survive the death of their bodies? In other words, why is everybody some kind of substance dualist? There have been at least 30 studies that in our book, The Substance of Consciousness, we document at least 30 studies, Sean, that psychologists have done on little children. And they are naturally Cartesian dualists. One psychologist said they don't have to be taught that they're a soul. By the time they're 3 or 4, they naturally recognize that they're different than their bodies and brains. And there's a little incipient belief of survival after death that they already have. This is true in atheist cultures. This is true before they have religious training. This is true before they're old enough to even understand religious doctrine. So it can't be due to indoctrination from the culture. This is a spontaneous formation of a belief about ourselves that little children automatically have all over the world. They're natural born dualists, is what the studies have shown. Everybody believes that they're non-physical and different from their body, except for a few people who have been indoctrinated that is a stupid thing to believe. And I think that the reason people might have questions about the soul is they've been told, well, that's not scientific, and so you should give it up. Or in atheist countries, when they start wanting to push a materialist agenda after a few generations, they talk children out of believing in the soul. So now the hard problem is, where would anybody come up with the idea of a soul if physicalism is true? I mean, after all, no one had ever experienced one. It's an almost impossible thing to explain why everybody's a Cartesian dualist. And so they have got to answer that question. And what they have to say is that our awareness of ourselves, when we just focus on us, when I'm trying to focus on my own self, or maybe close my eyes and wonder what's going on inside of me right now, what am I feeling, that I am systematically deluded about what I find. Because what I'm really aware of is my brain, not something that hurts or that is immaterial, or not some ego or self. but I'm just aware of part of my brain. I will tell you, Sean, I'm 75 years old. There has never been one time in my life when I've ever been introspectively aware of my brain.
Hmm.
In fact, if I only relied on what I knew by direct awareness, I wouldn't even know I had a brain. I know I have a brain because I know that other people have brains, and I've seen when you open their heads, they have a brain in surgery, and I'm very analogous to them. So obviously, it's most reasonable for me to know I've got a brain, but I'm not aware of it by introspective awareness. The dualist has an answer to the question. The reason everybody's a dualist is because we have souls and we're just aware of ourselves. It's kind of a simple common sense answer, but I think that's in its favor. But the physicalist doesn't have a good answer to that question, and they need to offer us one because they have a fact that they've got to explain.
Okay, so that's really helpful. Oh, I'm sorry.
And if they don't explain that fact, and we do, that's a problem.
Okay, that's helpful. So the C means that it appears to children across culture. You have examples of the book Across Time, that
Yes.
human beings understand themselves as body and soul in some sense, and
Yes.
that identity can continue after the grave,
That's right.
after death. That makes sense in a theistic worldview, a substance dualist position. But within physicalism, it would seem to me that the only explanation could be some kind of evolutionary story, wouldn't it be?
That's about the only thing you can come up with. I mean, you could say that people were indoctrinated by religion to believe this. But number one, in atheist countries, little children are born and they automatically are dualists. And little children are automatically dualists without having understood any religious teaching. It's before they even form those religious concepts. So you can't explain it by religious indoctrination. The evolutionary explanation is going to be the only one. And here's where evolutionary explanations, as Thomas Nagel, the famous atheist, said, embarrasses itself because it's used to explain every single thing in sight, including things that are beyond its ability to explain. I mean, how is having a concept of me being a soul survival enhancing? I mean, you would think that if organisms began to believe that, they would be less concerned about their bodily death because they would realize that they were going to be happier in an afterlife without their body. So it might actually contribute to organisms not being concerned about being eaten or dying. They might want to go. In other words, you can explain evolutionary advantage of the belief and the disadvantage of it both equally well. So evolution doesn't explain the origin of this belief at all.
In some ways, if we do attribute it to evolution, then it raises the question, if this belief that of substance dualism is so deeply ingrained, it's strong, and it's so diverse, then what other beliefs do we hold that seem to be true are also mistaken if we give this one up? Now, that is a very separate argument we don't have to go down to, but would seemingly follow if we explain this away in a purely naturalistic evolutionary fashion.
Well, and if you're going to be consistent, you've got to follow the question you raised to its logical conclusion, and you have to start asking about these other entities. And so at the end of the day, you've got to say, well, what's left in my worldview? I mean, does it really explain the world and life as I experience it every day? And the answer turns out it's pretty lean stuff. It's pretty lean.
All right, friends, we're here with Dr. J.P. Moreland, who's committed his life to apologetics, philosophy, really in particular, has a life tome, you might say, called The Substance of Consciousness. We're going to unpack it more, but make sure you write your comments in and your questions, your toughest challenges. He invites them and deals with his top critics in this book, and we're going live on Friday to take these together. So make them sweet and short and to the point. Best chance that we will take it. All right.